Hi everyone, this is Sue Zimmer with the Student Success Commons, and today's video is going to go over the pectoral girdle for Human Anatomy and Physiology 1. It's spring 2020. So let's get started. So the first thing that you'll need to know for the pectoral girdle is the clavicle. The clavicle is also known in casual conversation as your collarbone, but of course for this class you'll want to call it the clavicle. And there's no structures for you to know on it, so that's good. I'll just flip it all around. It's kind of just like this wavy looking bone. And there it is. So that is your clavicle right there. Clavicle. So the pectoral girdle is made up of the clavicle and the scapula. The clavicle is your collarbone and the scapula is like your shoulder blade. Just make sure you use the proper terms for those. With the scapula, you'll also need to know if it's a left or it's a right. So here's the scapula. Have a look. Here it is. When it comes to knowing if something's a left or a right, you really always want to have a bare minimum of 2 reference points. Don't ever use 1 reference point. And no matter how confident you are, because it's just a recipe for disaster, always have 2. And always ask yourself for justification. Because no matter how well you know this stuff, you can make mistakes. So I always ask myself, why is it a left? Why is it a right? Just as a reminder to myself that I need to look at the 2 reference points that I have in my mind to justify if it's a left or a right. Now, I think that what we'll do first is go over the features on the clavicle, and then we'll talk about different techniques to know if it is a left or a right. So let's start with that. So the first thing that you need to know is the acromion. So here we are, we're looking at the front of a clavicle, and the acromion, I'll angle it a little bit so you can see the back. The acromion is this that sticks out in the back. So now here's the front. I'm going to turn it around so you can see it a little better. This is the acromion here in the back. That's the back of it, okay? Posterior. Now I'm going to flip it over to the front, the anterior side. My finger is still on the acromion, and I'm going to move to the anterior side right here. So we're on the front, we're on the anterior side. That is the coracoid process. Now I say it that way because I don't want you to confuse it with the coronoid of the humerus and of the mandible. So make sure you say it to yourself. I kind of shout at myself when I do. I say coracoid, coracoid. So you have the acromion in the back on the posterior side. Turn it around again. That's your acromion. And then on the anterior side, you have the coracoid process, coracoid. So sometimes students like to just, if you visually know basically that this is the front and that's the back, you can move alphabetically. You have A and you have C. A, C. We start in the back. A is acromion. We go to the front. C is the coracoid process. Next up, you're going to have the glenoid cavity. Now, you can call the glenoid cavity, or you can call it the glenoid fossa. Helen will accept either one of those. So the glenoid cavity is what I always call it. But so here's the anterior side of the scapula, and I'll turn it here. So right here is the glenoid cavity. So this articulates with the head of the humerus. It kind of looks like it does. Once you know the humerus well, you can kind of see that. It just looks like it does. So that's the glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa, whatever you prefer. So here's the anterior side. I'm going to turn it to the side. That's the glenoid cavity right here. Next up, you have the supraspinous fossa. So we're on the anterior view of the scapula. I'm going to turn it around so you can see the posterior view. Here it is. And you have the supraspinous fossa. So I'm on superior. Turn it so you can kind of see. It's kind of hard to see with the lighting in here. It looks like a bathtub. That's the supraspinous fossa. Then below that, right here, now again, remember we're on the posterior side of the scapula. Right here is the infraspinous fossa. Now I'm going to flip it over to the anterior side again. So here we are on the front of our scapula. This is the subscapular fossa on the anterior side. Now all of those names sound very similar and it's very confusing for most students. So this is how I remember it. So if you look at your scapula, here's the front. I'm going to flip it over to the posterior side. Here we are, we're looking at the back of our scapula. This is the posterior side. Now in my mind, right here we have a spine on it, and that's my hip. Anything that's on this side with the spine, you see how the anterior side doesn't have a spine. Let me flip it over. The posterior side, maybe if I can go like this, you can see it a little better. The posterior side has a spine on it. See it? It's got a little spine right here. So anything that's on the posterior side has spine in the name because there's a spine on the back. And then if we think of our terminology, supra means above and fossa means like a dip. So of course, if we're above the spine, we're supraspinous fossa. Supraspinous fossa, above the spine dip. Supraspinous fossa. Looks like a bathtub. Put my hand in it. It's up top. And then of course, if we're below the spine, what are we? We're infraspinous fossa right here. So this part is below the spine right here. So then when you flip it over to this anterior side, there's no spine, so there's no spine in the name. So that's the subscapular fossa. So there's no spine in the name because there's no spine on this side. It's the subscapular fossa. So use those tricks and hopefully it will help you keep everything straight. Now the next and last problem that we have is to know if it's a left or it's a right. So you must always have 2 points of reference. So the 2 points of reference that I like to use are the glenoid cavity. Here's the anterior side. I'm going to turn it sideways. Here's the glenoid cavity. So I know that my glenoid cavity must be facing laterally because it's going to articulate with my humerus, right? And if it was facing the other way, I'd have a humerus in the middle of my body, which isn't a thing. That's not how mine is, so that doesn't make any sense. But that's not good enough because I could mess up and do this, and this is wrong. My glenoid cavity is lateral and articulating with my humerus, but this is the wrong. It's wrong because this is the back side. So I must have a second point of reference. So my personal second point of reference is that spine again. So on the posterior side, there's a spine. And so to me, the spine must be in the back. My spine is in the back. This spine must be in the back. So if I know that my glenoid cavity is lateral and my spine is in the back, just like my spine on my back, then I know I can be confident and I can say that I have, in this instance, I have a right scapula. So you decide the reference points that work for you. Everybody is different. Those are the 2 that I like, but always have 2 and always ask yourself, why is it a right? Why is it a left? Always answer that question for yourself. And that ends this video.